An undercover FBI operation exposes al-Qaeda terrorists posing as refugees in the middle of the American heartland. They quickly learned that lax background checks were to blame. But it turns out that's just the beginning. There may be dozens more now in this country as well. ABC's chief investigative correspondent Brian Ross got access to the undercover investigation for Nightline Investigates.
This FBI surveillance video was made not in Afghanistan or in Iraq, but in Kentucky. It shows an admitted al-Qaeda terrorist who had already killed American soldiers in Iraq, trying to get weapons to kill more of them. And authorities tell ABC News he may be just one of dozens of men with American blood on their hands who were mistakenly allowed to settle in the U.S. as refugees.
I wouldn't be surprised if there are many more than that. These are trained terrorists in the art of bomb making that are inside the United States. And quite frankly, from a Homeland Security perspective, that greatly concerns me.
The startling discovery of al-Qaeda in Kentucky took place in Bowling Green, Kentucky, a city of 60,000 people, seemingly far removed from concerns about terrorists next door. Until these two men quietly moved in, Wad Alwan and Mohammed Hamadi.
Of all places in the world, or all places in the United States, why Bowling Green?
The two men came from Iraq 4 years ago, among tens of thousands of refugees who the State Department approved to come here, seen as no threat to the U.S. But the two were, in fact, says the FBI, part of an al-Qaeda-connected insurgent group that had already killed American soldiers with roadside bombs. The group produced this video of their attacks around the Iraqi city of Baji. One bomb killed 4 members of the Pennsylvania National Guard on patrol at a Humvee in 2005, as Sergeant Joshua Hedet-Nimi painfully recalls.
It was a somber moment for the platoon. We had a great deal of love and respect for those guys, and it hit us pretty hard.
Warrant Officer Dan South was the only one in the Humvee to survive the attack.
Unless you smoke the guys that did it when it happened. Other than that, you never know who did it, you never know what happened to them. As far as you know, they got away with it scot-free.
And not just get away with it. An ABC News investigation found that the two terrorists, Alwan and Hamadi, were able to get through a flawed U.S. system of background checks and end up in Bowling Green. One living in this public housing apartment on public assistance, put under 24-hour surveillance by FBI agent Dick Glenn and others.
When we realized we had a man here with American soldiers' blood on his hands, it took it to a whole new level for us.
The other Iraqi lived in this residence near the high school.
Very scary.
And as the FBI would learn in the course of its undercover operation, the two Iraqis were intent on killing even more Americans.
These two individuals specifically are innately evil. To be able to act as a terrorist and to attack and kill American soldiers and then have the balls to come over to the United States and try to do the same exact thing here from our homeland is unacceptable.
The investigation of al-Qaeda in Kentucky was launched based on an intelligence tip forwarded to the FBI's office in Louisville and agents Keith Carpenter and Tim Beam.
Anytime you have an al-Qaeda in Iraq operative in the U.S., it's going to be a surprise.
At the prompting of an FBI informant who befriended the men, Alwan made these drawings of IEDs he said he made back in Iraq. And in undercover tapes with the informant, he boasted of building a dozen or more bombs and using a sniper's rifle to kill American soldiers in the Baji area.
He said that he had them for lunch and dinner, and meaning that he had killed them.
To hear him say that on the undercover tapes must have been chilling.
It was gut-wrenching.
But the big breakthrough in the case came out of this warehouse outside Washington, an FBI repository of virtually every IED or bomb used against American targets anywhere in the world.
Well, this is basically America's bomb library.
The remnants of some 100,000 bombs are stored in these boxes stacked to the ceiling here as part of a little-known FBI unit run by Gregory Carl.
When you really stop and think about what's actually in those boxes is really what makes you pause, thinking of all the troops that have been injured or wounded by these devices, and it really is kind of a sacred grounds.
Based on the description the FBI undercover got from Alwan of the type and location of the bombs he said he had built, a team of 40 FBI agents and technicians were assigned to go through the remnants of some 130 bombs and do some 14,000 fingerprint comparisons. And then, 2/3 of the way through, bingo.
I think
that I said, you will never believe it.
A bomb that had been recovered outside Baji in this pile of rocks before it was detonated was the key.
Inside of the device.
It matched in detail the drawing of a bomb Alwan had given the undercover FBI informant.
He's got a lot of the chemistry, the explosive stuff here. I would call that pretty sophisticated.
And better, as the lead FBI forensic specialist Katie Suchma and Stephen Mallow showed me. Fingerprints and a palm print on the detonating device, a wireless phone base station, matched those of Alwan in Kentucky.
Yeah, you can see right here.
And right there.
Yep.
What was that like when you made the match?
The whole team was ecstatic because it was like finding a needle in a haystack.
Word was sent back to Louisville.
It was a surreal moment. I mean, it was a real game changer, so to speak, for the case, because now you have solidified proof that he was involved in actual attacks against U.S. soldiers.
So this was somebody who was for real, not just full of empty
Exactly
boasts.
right, for real, in our backyard.
Scary?
Yes, yes. Reality of it could happen in our backyard. You know, whether it's Bowling Green, Washington, D.C., New York, it was here.
As the case continued, Alwan brought in the second Iraqi, Hamadi, and both were caught in the sting, seen on undercover cameras, loading weapons they thought were going to be shipped to al-Qaeda in Iraq.
In this picture, Mohanad Hamadi is holding one of the PKM machine guns that he believed that they were sending back to the al-Qaeda in Iraq forces to be used against the U.S. forces. In this picture, Walid Alwan is unloading a Stinger missile, an aircraft weapon that he believed was going to be able to be used against U.S. aircraft. This one, both Walid and Hamadi are loading a crate of C4 explosives that they think is going back.
So he was excited to be able to send this back to al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Absolutely.
According to federal prosecutors, Alwan also wanted to target a U.S. Army captain back in the U.S. who had been assigned to the Baji area.
They wanted to, assassinate, this particular U.S. captain.
And prosecutors say Hamadi urged other attacks on U.S. soil. Quote, "Many things should take place, and it should be huge," unquote.
We were happy that we were able to, bring justice to this individual that we knew that was involved in these kinds of acts overseas.
The two men were arrested in May 2011 and pleaded guilty to charges of providing material support to terrorists. Alwan was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Hamadi was sentenced to life, which he is appealing.
Honestly, I wish we could have smoked him when it happened, but we didn't have that opportunity, so I guess this is second best.
But for all the success of the undercover operation, the case has raised the question of how the State Department and the Citizenship and Immigration Service allowed the men to get into the country in the first place.
How do you have somebody that we now know was a known actor in terrorism overseas? How does that person get into the United States? How do they get into our communities?
The system failed here, though.
If you're asking my opinion, I would say the system failed. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been here in the first place.
The two got here by filling out this Immigration Service refugee application form and simply checking no next to the boxes that asked if they had been involved in any form of terrorist activity. They were approved, even though both men had been detained in Iraq for planting roadside bombs. And Alwan confessed to Iraqi authorities he was part of an insurgent group with his fingerprints actually in the Defense Department files years before he applied to come to the U.S., according to retired Lieutenant General Michael Barbero.
How did a person who we detained in Iraq linked to an IED attack, we had his fingerprints in a government system, how did he walk into America in 2009 and then, at least 2 years later before he came up on our radar screen?
At a congressional hearing, a Homeland Security official said none of that information was available to its screeners.
And all the biographic as well as the biometric checks that were performed at the time did come back clean.
Now an urgent search is underway at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, to go through a huge backlog of other bombs from Iraq and Afghanistan, with leads to a surprising number of other terrorists who also may have managed to move here undetected.
We are currently supporting dozens of current counterterrorism investigations like that.
Dozens of cases?
Correct.
Where you're looking for prints of people who are in this country now?
That's correct.
That's quite a thing.
It is, and I think that's what shows the seriousness of all of this.
The discovery of al-Qaeda in Kentucky led to a 6-month suspension of the refugee program, which has helped to resettle tens of thousands of legitimate refugees. The Immigration Service says it has now tightened security on background checks, in effect, closing the barn door after the fact.